The key didn't just stop working, it betrayed me. I stood there on my own porch, jiggling it over and over until the truth settled in like ice in my chest. 2 trash bags sat by the railing, my clothes, my toiletries, my life, reduced to something disposable. Then I saw him through the window. My stepson, Jason. He didn't open the door. He just looked at me and said, calm as anything, "You don't live here anymore, Viola." I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I sat down on that porch swing, hands shaking, heart breaking, and made one phone call. If this moment made your stomach drop, you're not alone. Before I tell you what happened next, take a second to like this video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from and what you would have done if you were sitting where I was. My name is Viola Price. I'm 62 years old, and until 8 months ago, I thought I understood what stability felt like. It wasn't anything flashy. I didn't live in a mansion or travel the world. But I had a home, a real one. A quiet 2-story house in a suburban neighborhood outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The kind of place where the mailman knows your name and the neighbors wave when you bring in your groceries. More importantly, I had my husband, Edward Price. We were married for 15 years. Not a whirlwind romance, not a fairy tale, but something steadier, something earned. Edward was a careful man, methodical, thoughtful, the kind of person who read every document twice and kept copies of everything. He had built a comfortable life long before I came into it, but he never made me feel like I was stepping into someone else's world. He made space for me in it. That house, it was his before it was ours. But over the years, things changed. Not overnight, not dramatically, just small decisions that added up. He added my name to accounts. He updated documents. He told me more than once in that quiet way of his, "Viola, I want you to be secure no matter what happens." At the time, I didn't think much of it. You don't expect the person sitting across from you at breakfast to become a memory. But then one morning he was gone. A heart attack. Sudden. No warning. And just like that, the house felt different. The walls didn't echo the same way. The silence was heavier, like it had weight. For the first few weeks, I barely functioned. Grief doesn't arrive in neat stages the way people describe. It comes in waves, unexpected, uneven. One moment you're folding laundry, the next you're standing still because you caught the scent of his aftershave on a shirt you forgot to wash. That's when Jason started coming around more often. Jason Price, Edward's son from his first marriage. He was 38, successful on paper, some kind of small business owner, always talking about projects and opportunities. We had never been close. Polite, yes. Civil, always. But there was a distance between us that never quite closed, no matter how many holidays we shared. Still, after Edward died, he stepped in. At first, I was grateful. He brought groceries without asking, fixed a loose cabinet door, checked the thermostat. Little things that in those early weeks felt like kindness. "I just want to make sure you're okay," he told me once, standing in the kitchen with his arms crossed like he belonged there. Dad would want that. And maybe he was right. But something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. Not then, and certainly not now. Because the help didn't stay simple. It shifted. Subtly at first. He started asking questions. Not casual ones either. "How are you handling the bills? Do you remember when the property taxes are due? Have you looked at Dad's accounts lately?" At first I answered. I thought it was concern. I thought maybe he was trying to step up in a way he hadn't before. But then the questions started coming with a tone. A correction here. A raised eyebrow there. "No, Viola, that's not how that works. Are you sure you're remembering that right? You might want to write things down. Just in case." The first time he said that, I laughed it off. Told him I'd always had a good memory. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. And that's when I began to notice something else. He wasn't just visiting more often, he was staying longer. Sometimes he'd walk through the house without asking, like he was inspecting it. Opening drawers, glancing at paperwork on the counter. Once I came back from the backyard and found him standing in Edward's study holding one of the folders from the desk. "What are you doing?" I asked. He didn't even look embarrassed, just set it down casually and said, "Just trying to help you get organized." I told myself not to overreact. Grief makes you sensitive. That's what people say. But there was a pattern forming and I could feel it even if I couldn't fully name it yet. And then there was Amber, Jason's wife. She started coming with him more often too. Amber was warm on the surface. Soft voice, gentle smile, always asking if I needed anything. She'd hug me a little too tightly when she arrived, like she was performing grief instead of sharing it. "You shouldn't be alone so much," she told me once, sitting across from me at the dining table. "It's not good for you at your age." At your age. It was the first time she'd said it like that. I remember pausing, my hand still wrapped around my coffee mug. "I'm managing just fine," I replied. "Of course you are," she said, quickly smiling again. "We just worry." They always said that. We just worry. But worry doesn't rearrange your life. Worry doesn't stand in your kitchen and look around like it's measuring something. Worry doesn't ask how much your house might be worth if you ever decided to downsize. That question came a week later. Jason leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone like it was nothing. "You know," he said, "this neighborhood's market is pretty strong right now. Houses like this don't sit long." I looked at him, confused. "I'm not selling," I said. "I didn't say you were," he replied quickly. "Just something to think about. Something to think about." That phrase stayed with me longer than I expected. Because it wasn't just what he said. It was how often he said things like that. Little suggestions, tiny nudges, always framed as concern. Always wrapped in that same calm, reasonable tone. But underneath it there was something else. Something I couldn't quite prove yet. Only feel. Like standing in a room where the temperature is slowly dropping and you don't realize how cold it's gotten until your hands start to shake. Looking back now, I understand it much more clearly. Jason wasn't just checking on me. He was studying me, testing boundaries, seeing how much I would question and how much I would accept. And the most dangerous part, he was patient. He didn't rush. He didn't push too hard, too fast. He waited. And I think deep down he believed that grief would make me soft. That losing Edward had made me weaker. Easier to move. Easier to convince. Easier to replace. He was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong yet. When I married Edward, I knew I was stepping into a life that already had history. Jason was 23 back then, grown, independent, already forming opinions about the world and the people in it. I was 47, steady in my own ways, not looking to replace anyone, not trying to be anything other than a partner to his father. We were never hostile toward each other, but we were never warm either. Jason kept a polite distance, the kind that looks respectful from the outside but feels like a wall when you're standing in front of it. He would show up for holidays, bring a bottle of wine, make small talk, then leave early with some excuse about work. Edward always believed time would fix that. "He just needs to see you're not going anywhere," he told me once, his hand resting gently over mine at the dinner table. "He's protective. That's all." Maybe Edward needed to believe that. Because the truth was, Jason didn't see me as temporary. He saw me as unnecessary. Still, we built a life anyway. 15 years of shared routines, Sunday breakfasts, quiet evenings, long drives with no destination. The kind of marriage that doesn't need constant excitement to feel full. And through all of it, Jason remained on the edges, not interfering, not engaging, just watching. That's why after Edward died, the change in Jason felt so sharp. It wasn't just that he started showing up more. It was how he showed up. At first, he positioned himself as the one holding everything together. "I'll take care of things," he told me the week after the funeral, standing in the living room where sympathy flowers were still wilting on every surface. "You don't need to worry about paperwork right now." I nodded, too exhausted to argue. Grief makes you accept help without asking what it costs. And Jason was very good at making his help seem necessary. He began inserting himself into small decisions, calling utility companies on my behalf, reviewing bank statements I hadn't asked him to look at, even redirecting a piece of mail once, claiming it was probably something important that he didn't want me to miss. Each action on its own was explainable, reasonable even, but together, they formed something else, something heavier. Something that felt less like support and more like control. Amber, meanwhile, perfected her role. If Jason was the one taking charge, Amber was the one softening it. She would sit with me in the kitchen, her voice gentle, her eyes full of what looked like concern. "You've been through so much, Viola," she said one afternoon, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "No one expects you to handle everything alone." "I'm not alone," I replied quietly. "I'm managing." "Of course," she said quickly. "You're strong. We all know that. But strength doesn't mean you have to carry everything by yourself." It sounded kind. It sounded supportive. But there was always something just beneath it. A suggestion. A direction. a subtle push toward dependence, and Jason reinforced it in his own way. One evening, about a month after Edward's passing, the three of us were sitting in the living room. The television was on, but no one was really watching it. Jason suddenly muted it and turned to me. "Viola," he said, his tone careful, almost rehearsed, "have you thought about getting someone to help you manage things? Just temporarily." I frowned. "Manage what exactly?" "Well, finances, appointments, the house," he said, gesturing vaguely around the room. "It's a lot for one person." "I've been managing my own life for decades," I replied. "I know," he said quickly. "I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying it might be easier," Amber chimed in gently. "It's not about ability. It's about making things less stressful for you." There it was again. That same pattern. Not direct control. Just nudging. Always framed as concern. Always positioned as something for my benefit. I remember sitting there looking at both of them and feeling something shift inside me. Not fear, not yet, but awareness, because for the first time I realized they weren't just reacting to my grief. They were shaping it, using it as a reason, an explanation, a justification. And the more they repeated it, the more it started to feel like they were trying to convince not just me, but everyone else around us. The real turning point came a few weeks later. We were at a small neighborhood gathering, nothing formal, just a few neighbors chatting over drinks in someone's backyard. It was the first time I'd gone out socially since Edward passed. I was nervous but also grateful. For a moment I felt almost normal again, until I overheard Jason. He was standing a few feet away talking to one of the neighbors, Mr. Collins. "I just worry about her," Jason was saying, his voice low but not low enough. "She forgets things sometimes. Little stuff, but still." My chest tightened. I stepped closer, not making my presence obvious right away. "It's probably just the grief," Mr. Collins said kindly. "Yeah," Jason replied, sighing. "That's what I keep telling myself. But you never know how these things progress at her age." At her age. Again, that phrase. Used like a quiet weapon. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not confusion this time. Not uncertainty. Clarity. Because that wasn't concern. That was narrative. Carefully planted. Deliberately shared. And suddenly all the small moments from the past weeks lined up in my mind. The corrections. The questions. The suggestions. The subtle doubts. It wasn't random. It wasn't emotional. It was strategic. They were building a version of me. A version where I was forgetful. Fragile. In need of oversight. And once that version existed, it wouldn't matter what I said about myself. People would start to believe it. Even me, if I wasn't careful. That night, I didn't confront Jason. I didn't call him out. I simply watched, listened, and started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. Because something inside me had shifted. The grief was still there. The loneliness hadn't gone anywhere. But underneath it, there was something else now. Something sharper. A quiet, growing understanding that I was no longer just a widow trying to rebuild her life. I was becoming a problem they needed to solve, and they had already started working on the solution. I just didn't know how far they were willing to go yet, but I would. Soon enough. Once you start noticing something is wrong, you can't unsee it. That's what changed everything for me. Before I had been moving through my days, wrapped in grief, accepting things at face value because I simply didn't have the strength to question them. But after that night at the neighbors' gathering, after hearing Jason carefully plant those doubts about me, I began to pay attention. And once I did, the pattern became impossible to ignore. It started with small things. So small that taken individually, they could still be explained away. One morning, I went to the kitchen drawer where I always kept my checkbook. It wasn't there. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty space like it might reappear if I just waited long enough. I retraced my steps in my mind, trying to remember if I had moved it myself. Maybe I had. That's what Jason would say after all. But something in my chest tightened, because I didn't remember moving it. Not even vaguely. I searched the kitchen, then the living room, then the hallway table. Nothing. Finally, I found it in a completely different drawer, one I never used, tucked beneath a stack of old menus. When Jason came by that afternoon, I mentioned it casually. "I couldn't find my checkbook this morning," I said, watching his face carefully. Turns out it was in the wrong drawer. He didn't even hesitate. You probably put it there and forgot, he replied with a small shrug. Just like that. No curiosity, no concern, just confirmation of the story he'd already been telling. I nodded slowly, as if accepting his explanation, but inside something hardened, because I knew myself. And I knew I hadn't done that. A few days later it happened again. This time it was one of Edward's folders from his study. He had always kept his documents meticulously organized, tax records, insurance papers, account statements, all labeled, all in order. It was one of the things I had admired about him. After he passed, I had tried to maintain that system. It made me feel close to him, grounded, in control. But when I opened the cabinet that afternoon, one of the folders was missing. Not misplaced. Gone. I checked every shelf, every stack, every drawer. Nothing. My heart started to race, not out of confusion this time, but out of something sharper. Suspicion. When Jason arrived later that evening, I didn't mention it right away. I watched him instead. The way he moved through the house like he belonged there. The way he glanced at things, not casually but deliberately, taking stock, measuring. Finally, I said, "Have you been in Edward's study recently?" He looked at me just for a second longer than necessary. "Why?" he asked. "One of the folders is missing," I replied evenly. He frowned, but it felt practiced. "I haven't touched anything in there," he said. "You might have moved it while you were going through things." There it was again. That same calm redirection, that same quiet implication. I held his gaze. I didn't move it. For a brief moment, something flickered in his expression. Not guilt. Not exactly. More like irritation. But it was gone just as quickly. "Well," he said, shrugging again, "things get mixed up. It happens." Amber, who had been standing in the doorway, stepped in then. "I can help you look for it," she offered sweetly. "Sometimes a second pair of eyes makes all the difference." I forced a smile. "Thank you," I said, "but I'll find it." Because by then I wasn't just looking for a folder anymore. I was looking for proof. Proof that what I was feeling wasn't just grief making me paranoid. Proof that something was actually happening inside my own home. And the more I paid attention, the more that proof began to surface. Drawers slightly ajar when I knew I had closed them. Papers shifted just enough to notice. A kitchen cabinet left open when I was certain I hadn't touched it. Each incident on its own was small, but together they told a story. A story where I was being slowly, deliberately unsettled, made to question myself, made to doubt my memory. And once you doubt your own mind, you lose your footing. You become easier to guide, easier to control. That realization came to me fully one afternoon when I walked down the hallway and heard voices coming from the living room, Jason and Amber. They didn't know I was home yet. I paused just before turning the corner, something instinctive holding me back. "We need to move faster," Amber was saying, her voice low but urgent. "I know," Jason replied, "but we can't push too hard." "Not yet." "She's already starting to question things," Amber said. "If she digs too much, she won't," Jason cut in. "She doesn't trust her own memory anymore." "That's the whole point." My breath caught in my throat. The whole point. I stood there frozen, my hand pressed lightly against the wall to steady myself. "She's grieving," Jason continued, his tone almost clinical. "People expect her to be off balance. We just have to keep reinforcing that." "And the house?" Amber asked. "We'll get there," he said. "One step at a time." Silence fell between them for a moment. Then Amber spoke again, softer this time. "Are you sure this is going to work?" Jason let out a quiet laugh. "It already is. I don't remember how long I stood there. Seconds. Minutes. Time seemed to stretch and collapse all at once, because in that moment everything I had been feeling, every doubt, every uneasy instinct, clicked into place with terrifying clarity. This wasn't accidental. It wasn't misunderstanding. It wasn't even manipulation in the emotional sense. It was calculated, deliberate, planned. They weren't just trying to help me. They were trying to erase me. Piece by piece. Until I became someone no one would question removing. I stepped back quietly, making sure not to make a sound. Then I walked out the front door, closing it gently behind me. I needed air. Space. Something solid beneath my feet. Because the house, the place that had always been my anchor, suddenly felt unfamiliar. Unsafe. And for the first time since Edward died, I felt something stronger than grief. Stronger than loneliness. Stronger even than fear. Anger. Not loud, not explosive, but deep, steady, and very, very clear. They thought I was slipping. They thought I was confused. They thought I wouldn't notice. They were wrong, and I was done pretending otherwise. I didn't confront them. That was the first decision I made after everything became clear, not because I was afraid, but because I finally understood something important. Confrontation would only help them. If I accused them without proof, they would simply fold it into their narrative. Another sign that I was confused, another example of me misunderstanding things. No, if they were playing a long game, then so was I. And the first person I turned to was Linda Harper. Linda had been my closest friend for over 20 years. We met at a community fundraiser, bonded over bad coffee and shared opinions, and somehow never drifted apart after that. She was sharp, observant, and most importantly, she had spent nearly 3 decades working as a probate clerk. If something was wrong, Linda would see it. I invited her over for tea that afternoon, choosing my words carefully when she arrived. "You look tired," she said immediately, setting her purse down and studying my face. "Not just grief tired. Something else." I let out a slow breath and gestured toward the kitchen table. "Sit," I said. "I need to tell you something." And then I told her everything. Not just the lockout, because that hadn't happened yet, but everything leading up to it. The missing checkbook, the moved files, the conversations, the way Jason corrected me in front of others, the way Amber softened it, wrapped it in concern. And finally, what I had overheard in the hallway. Linda didn't interrupt. She just listened, her expression growing more serious with every word. When I finished, the room felt very quiet. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she leaned back slightly, folded her hands in front of her, and looked at me in a way she never had before. "Viola," she said carefully, "this isn't just family tension." My stomach tightened. "I didn't think it was," I replied. "No," she continued, shaking her head slightly. "This is something else. This is structured." "Structured," I echoed. She nodded. "I've seen cases like this before," she said. "Not identical, but similar patterns. It starts with small doubts, questions about memory capability. Then it builds. Documentation, witness impressions, subtle isolation. Eventually, it turns into a legal argument. A legal argument for what I asked, though I already had a feeling. For control, Linda said plainly. Financial control, residential control, sometimes full guardianship. The word landed heavily between us. Guardianship. That would mean... I started. "That would mean someone else makes decisions for you," Linda said. "Where you live, how your money is handled, everything." A chill ran through me. "They can't just do that," I said. "No," she agreed. "Not easily. But if they can convince people you're not capable, if they build enough of a case, it becomes possible." I sat back in my chair, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "And you think that's what Jason is doing?" Linda didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked, "Has he asked you to sign anything?" I hesitated. "He brought some papers the other day," I said slowly. "Said they were temporary management forms." "I didn't sign them." Linda's eyes sharpened. "Good," she said firmly. "Do not sign anything he gives you. Not now, not later. Not unless a lawyer you trust reviews it first." I nodded, my heart beginning to beat faster. "And the house?" she asked. "Whose name is it in? Edward added me years ago," I said. "We both owned it." "Joint tenancy," she pressed. "Yes. That helps," she said. "But it doesn't make you untouchable." I swallowed hard. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Linda leaned forward, slightly lowering her voice. "Did Edward ever mention anything unusual toward the end?" she asked. "Any concerns? Any changes to his estate?" I frowned, thinking. Edward had always been careful, but secretive wasn't the right word. He just handled things quietly. Then something surfaced in my memory. A conversation from years ago. Not dramatic, not urgent, but deliberate. He told me once, I said slowly, that if anything ever felt off, after he was gone, I should go to the bank. Linda's gaze locked onto mine. "What bank?" she asked. "Our bank," I replied. "The one we've always used." "And what did he say exactly?" I closed my eyes for a moment, replaying the memory. "He said there was a packet," I said. "A sealed one, in the safe deposit box. He told me not to open it unless I needed to." Linda didn't move, didn't blink. "Viola," she said quietly, "that's not normal." I didn't think it was at the time, I admitted. But Edward always planned ahead. I assumed it was just Paperwork. Linda shook her head slightly. No, she said. That sounds like contingency planning. For what? I asked. She held my gaze. For exactly this. The room seemed to tilt slightly. You think he knew? I asked. I think he suspected, Linda replied, or at least considered the possibility. I looked down at my hands. Edward had never spoken badly about Jason, never accused him of anything. But now I wondered how much he had seen that he chose not to say out loud. What should I do? I asked quietly. Linda didn't hesitate. Get that packet, she said, as soon as possible. And then we see what he left for you, she replied. And we go from there. I nodded slowly. For the first time since everything had started unraveling, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, not yet, but direction. A next step. A path forward that didn't depend on reacting to Jason, but on understanding what Edward had prepared. Linda reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. You're not crazy, Viola, she said firmly. What you're seeing, what you're feeling, it's real. I looked up at her, my throat tightening slightly. Thank you, I whispered. Don't thank me yet, she said, her expression serious again, because if we're right, this isn't going to stop on its own. I nodded. I knew that. I had felt it building, slowly, patiently, like something waiting for the right moment to reveal itself fully, and deep down, I think I already knew that moment was coming. I just didn't know how soon. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. Grief was still there, it always would be, but it was no longer the only thing guiding me. There was something else now, awareness, intent, and a quiet, steady resolve. I didn't tell Jason about the safe deposit box. I didn't mention Linda's concerns. I didn't confront anything. Instead, I waited, because Linda had been right about one thing. If Jason was building something, he wasn't finished yet. And sure enough, he came to me. It was late afternoon when he arrived, letting himself in the same way he always did now, without knocking, without asking, as if the house had already shifted in his mind from mine to his. Viola, he called out, setting his keys on the kitchen counter. We need to talk. I was standing by the sink, drying a dish slowly. About what I asked without turning around. I heard his footsteps move closer. About making things easier for you, he said. There it was again. That phrase. I turned then, meeting his eyes. I'm managing just fine, I said evenly. He sighed like I was being difficult on purpose. I know you think that, he replied, but there are things you're not seeing. And what exactly am I not seeing? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the leather folder he was carrying and pulled out a stack of papers. That's what this is for, he said, placing them on the table. I didn't move. What is it? I asked. Just some temporary arrangements, he said casually. Power of attorney mostly. It would allow me to handle certain things for you, bills, property management, legal stuff. Nothing permanent. My chest tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. Why would I need that? I asked. Because you're overwhelmed, he said, a hint of impatience slipping into his voice. Because you're grieving. Because things are slipping through the cracks. Nothing is slipping, I replied. That's not what I've been seeing, he said. There it was. Not what I've been seeing. As if his perception held more weight than my reality. I stepped closer to the table and looked down at the papers, but I didn't touch them. And if I don't sign this, I asked quietly. Jason's jaw tightened. Then you're making things harder than they need to be, he said. For who? I asked. That question hung in the air between us. For just a second, he didn't have an answer. Then he exhaled slowly, as if recalibrating. For everyone, he said finally, including yourself. I met his gaze, steady and unyielding. I'm not signing anything, I said. The shift in him was immediate, subtle but unmistakable. The softness disappeared. The patience thinned. What are you afraid of? He asked. I'm not afraid, I replied. Then why are you being so resistant? He pressed. Because I don't need this, I said. He let out a short, humorless laugh. You don't think you do, he corrected. That's the problem. I felt a flicker of anger rise in my chest, but I kept it contained. Jason, I said, my voice calm but firm, this is my home, my life. I am not handing control of it over to you. Something in his expression hardened. I'm trying to help you, he said. No, I replied quietly. You're trying to take over. The silence that followed was heavy, thick, charged. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he gathered the papers slowly, his movements precise, controlled. "Fine," he said. "If that's how you want to do this, do this. Not help, not support. Do this." A line had just been drawn. And we both knew it. Amber appeared in the doorway then, as if she had been waiting for the tension to peak. "Everything okay?" she asked softly. Jason didn't look at her. "She's refusing," he said. Amber's eyes shifted to me, her expression carefully composed. "Viola," she said, gently stepping forward, "no one is trying to take anything from you. We're just trying to make sure you're safe." "I am safe," I replied. Her smile tightened slightly. "Of course," she said. "But safety isn't always about how things feel. Sometimes it's about putting the right structures in place." Structures. Another word that sounded harmless, but wasn't. "I don't need your structures," I said. Amber's gaze flickered toward Jason, then back to me. "Well," she said lightly, "we'll revisit this later. No need to rush." No need to rush, but there had been urgency in her voice before. I had heard it. Jason picked up his folder and moved toward the door without another word. Amber lingered a moment longer. "You don't have to do everything alone," she said softly. "That's all we're saying." Then she followed him out. The door closed behind them with a quiet click. And just like that, the house felt different again. Not invaded this time, not uncertain, but waiting. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the table where the papers had been. Power of attorney, temporary arrangements, control. They had made their move, and I had refused, which meant they would escalate. I knew that now. Not instinctively, not vaguely, but with certainty, because people who plan like that don't stop when they hit resistance. They adjust. They push. They find another angle. That night I barely slept, not out of fear, but out of anticipation, because something had shifted. The quiet manipulation was over. Now it would become something more direct, more visible, more dangerous. And the next day proved me right. I left the house around noon to meet Linda for lunch. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic, just a simple break from the tension. We talked about ordinary things, weather, groceries, a new cafe that had opened downtown. For a little while, I almost forgot everything that was building around me. Almost, because when I pulled back into my driveway an hour later, something was wrong. I saw it before I even got out of the car. The front door. Something about it looked different. I stepped out slowly, my heart beginning to pound, walked up the path, reached into my purse for my keys, and told myself just once that maybe I was imagining it, that maybe nothing had changed, that maybe I was overreacting. But deep down, I already knew. I stepped onto the porch, slid the key into the lock, turned it, and felt nothing. No give, no click, just resistance, cold, final. I tried again, harder this time, still nothing. That's when I saw the bags. 2 large trash bags sitting by the porch railing, my clothes, my things, my life, thrown out like I didn't belong. And in that moment, everything became very, very clear. For a few seconds, I didn't move. I just stood there on my own porch key, still in my hand, staring at those bags like they belonged to someone else. It's a strange thing how the mind tries to protect you in moments like that. It slows everything down, softens the edges, gives you just enough distance to keep from breaking all at once. But the truth doesn't stay softened for long. It sharpens, and when it does, it cuts deep. I walked forward slowly, my shoes making soft sounds against the wooden boards of the porch. My hand reached out, not toward the door, not toward the lock, but toward the nearest bag. I opened it. Inside were my clothes, not folded, not packed, thrown in, blouses crumpled, shoes mismatched, a sweater I had worn just days ago twisted beneath everything else like it had been shoved in without a second thought. The second bag held toiletries, my medications, my brush, things that had been in my bathroom that morning. They hadn't just moved me out, they had erased me. I straightened slowly, my chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. Then I looked up, and that's when I saw him. Jason, standing just inside the house, visible through the front window, watching me, not hiding, not ashamed, just watching. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he stepped closer to the door, but he didn't open it. He stood on the other side of it, close enough that I could see every detail of his expression. Calm, certain, untouchable. "You shouldn't be here," he said through the glass. His voice was muffled but clear enough. I stared at him. "I live here," I replied, my voice steady, despite the storm building inside me. He shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "Not anymore." The words landed like a physical blow. Not because I believed them, but because of the audacity behind them. The certainty. The way he said it like it had already been decided. I took a step closer to the door. "You changed the locks," I said. It wasn't a question. He didn't deny it. "It's safer this way," he replied. Safer? I almost laughed. "For who?" I asked. "For everyone," he said, echoing the same line from the day before. "You're not thinking clearly right now, Viola. This is temporary. Temporary. Everything with him was temporary until it wasn't. I want you to open the door," I said. He didn't move. "I can't do that," he replied. "Can't I?" repeated. "Shouldn't he?" corrected. I felt something inside me snap, not outwardly, not in a way he could see, but deep, quiet, and permanent. Because in that moment I understood something with absolute clarity. He didn't think I could stop him. He believed he had already won. That whatever story he had been building about my memory, my stability, my ability to manage my own life, was strong enough now to justify this, to justify locking me out of my own home, to justify throwing my belongings into trash bags like I was a stranger, to justify standing on the other side of that door and telling me I didn't belong there anymore. And the worst part, he wasn't even angry. Anger would have meant emotion, conflict, something human. But this was calculation. Cold, controlled, final. Behind him I saw movement. Amber. She stepped into view, standing a few feet back, her arms crossed loosely in front of her. Her expression was different from his. Not calm, not certain, nervous, but not enough to stop him. "Viola," she said, her voice softer, almost pleading, "this is for your own good." I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time I saw past the softness, past the gentle tone, past the careful words. There was no confusion there, no hesitation. She knew exactly what was happening, and she was choosing it. "My own good," I repeated. "You need rest," she said. "You've been under a lot of stress. This environment, it's not helping." "This is my home," I said. Jason stepped forward again, closer to the door. "And we're making sure it stays protected," he replied. "Protected. From me." I let out a slow breath, forcing my hands to stay steady at my sides. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. Jason's expression didn't change. "We've looked into some options," he said. "There are places that can help you. Assisted living, temporary housing, somewhere you can get proper support." Proper support. The words echoed in my mind. This wasn't just about the house. This was the next step. Removal. Displacement. Control. I nodded slowly, as if I were considering his words, as if I were processing them. But inside, everything had already shifted. Because standing there on that porch with my life in 2 trash bags and my own front door closed to me, I wasn't confused. I wasn't weak. I wasn't lost. I was being tested, and they were waiting to see how I would respond. Would I cry, beg, argue, break down in a way they could point to later as proof? I could see it in Jason's eyes. He was watching for it, waiting for it, expecting it. But I didn't give it to him. Instead, I turned away from the door. Slowly, deliberately, I walked to the porch swing and sat down. The wood creaked softly beneath me. My hands rested in my lap. Still, controlled. I could feel their eyes on me through the window. Feel their confusion. This wasn't the reaction they had planned for. Good. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, held it there for a moment, not rushing, not hesitating, just choosing. Because this was the moment everything would change. Not when he locked the door, not when he threw out my things, but now, right here, with one decision, one call. I scrolled through my contacts, stopped at a name I hadn't needed to use in a very long time, Michael Grant, Edward's attorney. The man Edward had trusted with everything that mattered. The man Edward had told me years ago in a quiet conversation I had almost forgotten not to hesitate to call if anything ever felt wrong. "Well," I murmured softly to myself, my thumb hovering over the screen, "this feels wrong enough. Then I pressed the button. The phone rang once. Twice. On the third ring, he answered. "Michael Grant." "It's Viola Price," I said, my voice calm, steady, and clear. "I'm sitting on my porch right now, and I've just been locked out of my own house." There was a brief pause on the other end. Not confusion, not disbelief. Recognition. "Stay where you are," he said immediately. "Do not leave. Do not engage with them. I'm on my way." I ended the call, lowered the phone into my lap, and leaned back slightly on the swing. For the first time since I had pulled into the driveway, I felt something close to calm. Not because the situation had changed, but because I had. Inside the house, I saw Jason move again, pacing now, no longer still, no longer certain. Amber stepped closer to him, saying something I couldn't hear. And for the first time, they didn't look like they were in control. I sat there on that porch, exactly where they had left me. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I was watching. And this time, they were the ones who didn't know what was coming next. I didn't move from that porch. Not when Jason disappeared from the window. Not when Amber pulled the curtains halfway closed as if that thin layer of fabric could undo what they had already done. And not even when the late afternoon sun shifted, casting longer shadows across the yard that had once felt like mine, because Michael had told me to stay. And for the first time in days, I wasn't guessing what to do next. I was following something solid. Something Edward had put in place long before this moment ever arrived. Inside the house, I could still see movement shapes passing behind the curtains, the occasional flicker of a shadow near the front hallway. Jason was pacing. I could tell by the rhythm of it. Back and forth, back and forth. He hadn't expected this. That much was clear. He had expected confusion, emotion, maybe even panic, but not stillness, not a phone call, not resistance. Amber stepped into view once more just for a moment. She looked out at me, not with the same soft certainty as before, but with something closer to unease. Then she disappeared again. Good. Let them wonder. Claims let them sit with the uncertainty they had tried so carefully to create for me. I folded my hands in my lap and leaned back against the swing, letting the quiet settle around me. It gave me time to think. Time to replay everything that had led to this point. Every comment. Every shift. Every small violation I had once tried to explain away. It was all part of the same pattern. And now, it had reached its peak. Or so they thought. A car pulled into the driveway 28 minutes later. I knew the exact time because I had been watching the clock on my phone, not out of anxiety but out of awareness. A dark sedan, clean, unassuming, but the man who stepped out of it was anything but. Michael Grant looked almost exactly the same as the last time I had seen him at Edward's memorial service. Tall, composed mid-60s with silver hair and a presence that didn't need volume to command attention. He took in the scene in a single glance. The bags. Me on the porch. The closed door. His expression didn't change dramatically, but something in his eyes sharpened. "Viola," he said, walking toward me. "Michael," I replied, standing. "You all right?" he asked. "I will be," I said. He nodded once, then turned his attention to the house. "Are they inside?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Jason and Amber." "Did you argue with them?" he asked. "No." "Good," he said. "We'll keep it that way." There was something incredibly grounding about the way he spoke. No hesitation, no speculation, just direction. Another car pulled up behind his a few minutes later. A sheriff's vehicle. That caught Jason's attention. The curtain moved again. Then the front door opened. Jason stepped out onto the threshold, his posture tense but controlled. "What's going on?" he demanded, his eyes immediately locking onto Michael. Michael didn't raise his voice. Didn't step forward aggressively. He simply reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "What's going on," he said calmly, "is that you've unlawfully removed a legal resident and co-owner from her property." Jason scoffed. "That's not what this is," he said quickly. "She's not in a condition to stop," Michael interrupted, still calm but firmer now. "I'm not here for a discussion. I'm here to correct a violation." The sheriff stepped forward, then his presence quiet but unmistakable. "Sir," he said to Jason, "I'm going to need you to step aside and let us address this." Jason's gaze flickered between the two of them. "You don't understand," he said, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more urgent. "She's not capable of managing things right now." This is temporary. I'm her family. Michael didn't even blink. And she is the legal owner of this property, he replied, alongside your late father whose estate I oversee. You have no authority to remove her. None. Jason's jaw tightened. That's not what I've been told, he said. Michael tilted his head slightly. And who exactly told you that, he asked? Jason hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because hesitation means doubt. And doubt means weakness. Amber appeared in the doorway behind him, her hand lightly touching his arm. Jason, she said quietly, but he pulled away. No, he snapped. This is ridiculous. I'm trying to protect her. The sheriff stepped forward another inch. Sir, he said evenly, I need you to step away from the door. Jason didn't move. For a moment, the air felt thick again. Tense. Like something might snap. But then, he stepped back. Not willingly. Not gracefully. But he stepped back. Michael turned to me. Viola, he said, we're going to get you back inside your home now. Those words hit differently than I expected. Not just relief, not just validation, but something deeper, something reclaiming. The locksmith Michael had brought stepped forward, examining the lock briefly before beginning his work. Jason stood off to the side, his arms crossed tightly, his expression no longer calm. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I could see it in his eyes. He had built something, planned something, and it was unraveling faster than he could control. Amber, on the other hand, looked shaken. Not defiant, not confident, just uncertain. The sound of the lock being removed was louder than it should have been. Metal against metal. A final, irreversible shift. Within minutes, the door opened. Michael stepped aside, slightly gesturing toward it. After you, he said. I paused for just a moment, standing there, looking at the doorway. The same doorway I had walked through thousands of times. The same threshold that had been closed to me less than an hour ago. And now, it was open again. But everything had changed. I stepped forward, crossed into the house, and immediately felt it. Not relief, not comfort, but awareness. This was still my home, legally, rightfully, but it had been violated, handled, shifted. I could feel it in the air. Behind me, Michael and the sheriff followed. Jason remained near the entryway, watching. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice tight. I turned to him slowly. No, I said. You did. For a brief moment, something flickered across his face. Not anger, not frustration, but something closer to realization. As if for the first time he was beginning to understand that this wasn't going to end the way he had planned. And the truth was, he still didn't know how wrong he was. Neither of them did. But they would. Very soon. Walking back into that house should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like stepping into a place that had been quietly rearranged while I wasn't looking. Not physically, at least not in any obvious way, but something deeper, something harder to define. The air felt different. And so did I. I moved slowly through the entryway, my hand brushing lightly against the wall, as if to confirm it was still real. The same framed photos hung where they always had. The same table stood by the door. The same faint scent of lemon polish lingered in the air. But the feeling of safety, the quiet certainty that this was my space, had been shaken. And that mattered, because Jason hadn't just tried to take my house. He had tried to take my footing. Behind me, I could hear Michael speaking quietly with the sheriff, their voices low and controlled. Jason remained near the doorway, silent now but watching everything. Amber stood slightly behind him, her posture no longer composed. She looked smaller somehow, less certain. Good. I stepped into the living room and paused. Edward's chair sat exactly where it always had, angled slightly toward the window. For a moment, the sight of it pulled something sharp through my chest. I missed him. Not just his presence, but his steadiness. His foresight. Because standing there now, I could feel it clearly. He had known something. Maybe not exactly this, but enough. Viola Michael's voice came from behind me, drawing me back. I turned. Yes, I'd like you to take a look at a few things, he said, holding up the folder he had brought with him. I nodded. We moved to the dining table, and he spread the documents out carefully, his movements precise and deliberate. These, he said, tapping the first page, are the current deed records for the property. I leaned in slightly, scanning the page. My name, Edward's name, Clear. Undisputed. Joint ownership, Michael continued, with rights of survivorship, which means that upon Edward's passing, full ownership transferred to you automatically. I looked up at him. So Jason has no claim, I asked. None, he said firmly. Not through the property itself. Jason shifted behind us. That's not what I was told, he said again, his voice strained. Michael didn't look at him. Then you were misinformed, he replied. Jason took a step closer. There are other documents, he said. Dad had plans. He talked about making sure things stayed in the family. Michael finally turned his head slightly. And they are in the family, he said calmly. Viola is his legal spouse, his chosen partner, his designated beneficiary in multiple areas. Jason's expression tightened. That's not what he wanted, he insisted. I turned to face him fully. You don't get to decide what he wanted, I said quietly. The room went still. For a moment, it felt like everything hung on that sentence. Because it wasn't just about the house. It was about authority, about rewriting the past to justify the present. Jason looked at me like he wanted to argue, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the sheriff still standing nearby. Maybe it was Michael's steady presence. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of doubt. Michael cleared his throat gently. There's something else, he said. My attention shifted back to him. You mentioned a sealed packet, he continued, from the safe deposit box. I nodded. Yes, I'd like you to retrieve it as soon as possible, he said. Given what's happened here, it may be relevant. Jason's head snapped slightly in our direction. What packet? He asked. I didn't answer. Michael did. That's none of your concern, he said evenly. Jason's jaw clenched. If it involves my father's estate, it is absolutely my concern, he shot back. Michael's gaze remained steady. Your father's estate is being handled according to legally binding documents, he said. Documents you do not control. Amber touched Jason's arm again, more urgently this time. Jason, she murmured, maybe we should just… No, he cut her off sharply. But his voice lacked the certainty it had earlier. The confidence was cracking. I could see it now. The edges of his plan, whatever he thought he had secured, were starting to unravel, and he didn't know how to hold them together. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. Michael, I said I want to go to the bank tomorrow. He nodded. I'll arrange it, he said. Jason let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You're really going to let him control everything he asked me? I met his gaze. He's not controlling anything, I said. He's protecting what's already mine. Jason shook his head. You don't even know what you're walking into, he said. No, I replied calmly. But I know what I'm walking away from. That seemed to hit him harder than anything else I had said. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting to him. I wasn't defending myself. I was moving forward. And he wasn't part of it. The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange, suspended state. The sheriff remained long enough to ensure there were no further issues. The locksmith finished replacing the lock, this time under Michael's direction with keys handed directly to me. Jason and Amber stayed in the house, but at a distance. Quiet, watchful, contained. It was a different kind of tension now. Not explosive, not confrontational, but unstable. Like something that had lost its foundation but hadn't fully collapsed yet. As evening settled in, Michael gathered his documents. I'll be in touch first thing in the morning, he said. We'll go to the bank together. Thank you, I said. He gave me a small nod. And Viola, he added, his tone softening slightly, don't engage with them tonight. Let things settle. I understood what he meant. Don't give them anything. Not words. Not reactions. Not leverage. I won't, I said. He left shortly after. The house grew quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. This one felt charged. Jason stood in the kitchen for a while, staring at nothing in particular. Amber moved around him, restless, uncertain. Eventually, without a word to me, they gathered their things and left. The front door closed behind them. And just like that, I was alone again. I walked slowly through the house, turning on lights as I went, room by room, space by space, reclaiming it. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. Because what had happened on that porch wasn't just an incident, it was a line. And now that it had been crossed, there was no going back to what things had been before. I stopped in the doorway of Edward's study, looked at his desk, the chair, the files, everything exactly as he had left it, Except now, I saw it differently. Not just as a place of memory, but as a place of answers. Because somewhere in this house or in that safe deposit box tomorrow, Edward had left something behind. Something important enough to seal. Something meant for a moment like this. And whatever it was, I had a feeling it was going to change everything. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind refused to slow down. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same image, my belongings in trash bags sitting on that porch like I was something to be discarded. And then just as quickly I saw something else, Jason's face when Michael arrived. That shift, that crack in his certainty. He hadn't expected resistance. And more importantly, he hadn't expected preparation. Neither had I, if I was honest. Not until Linda reminded me. Not until Edward's quiet foresight began to surface piece by piece. By the time morning came, I was already dressed, ready, focused. Michael arrived at exactly 9, punctual as always. "Good morning, Viola," he said as I opened the door. "Good morning," I replied. He studied my face for a moment. "You holding up?" he asked. "I am," I said. "Better than yesterday." He nodded slightly. "That's progress." We didn't waste time. The drive to the bank was quiet, not uncomfortable, just purposeful. I watched the streets pass by familiar places that suddenly felt different, as if I were seeing everything through a sharper lens. Because I was no longer just living my life. I was protecting it. We pulled into the parking lot of the bank Edward and I had used for years. It was one of those older institutions, solid brick exterior, understated signage, the kind of place built on trust more than appearance. Inside, the air was cool and still. A manager greeted Michael, immediately recognition clear in her expression. "Mr. Grant," she said, "good to see you again." "Likewise, Karen," he replied. "We need access to a safe deposit box. Edward Price's account." Her gaze shifted to me. "And you must be Mrs. Price," she said kindly. "I am," I replied. She nodded. "We've been expecting you." That caught my attention. "Expecting me?" I asked. Karen offered a small, knowing smile. "Mr. Price left very clear instructions," she said. "Of course he did." Michael didn't look surprised. "Let's proceed," he said. We were led into a secured area behind the main lobby down a narrow hallway that felt both private and significant. Karen unlocked the main vault door with a practiced ease, then guided us inside. The room was lined with rows of metal boxes, orderly, silent, unassuming, but one of them held something Edward had chosen carefully. Something he had sealed away for a moment he must have imagined, even if he never said it out loud. Karen retrieved the box and placed it on a small table. "I'll give you some privacy," she said. Then she stepped out. The room fell quiet. Michael gestured slightly. "Go ahead," he said. My hands felt steady as I reached for the key. That surprised me. I had expected nerves, emotion, but instead there was clarity. I unlocked the box, lifted the lid, and there it was. A large, sealed envelope. My name written on it. Viola. Not Mrs. Price, not formal, just Viola. My throat tightened slightly. I picked it up carefully. The weight of it was more than paper. It was intention, preparation, love in Edward's quiet, practical way. "Take your time," Michael said gently. I nodded. Then I broke the seal. Inside were several documents and a letter. I unfolded the letter first. Edward's handwriting. Familiar, steady, and suddenly, for the first time since all of this began, I felt him again. Not as a memory, but as a presence. Alive in the decisions he had made, I began to read. "Viola, if you are opening this, it means something has gone wrong." I paused, a breath catching in my chest. He had known, not exactly what, not every detail, but enough. I continued, "I hope I'm wrong. I hope this is unnecessary. But I have learned over the years that hope is not a plan, and I will not leave you unprotected." My vision blurred slightly, but I kept reading. "Jason is my son. I love him. But I have also seen parts of him that concern me. Choices he has made, decisions he has justified. And while I chose not to confront him in ways that would destroy what remained of our relationship, I did not ignore what I saw. I swallowed hard, because suddenly everything made sense. Several years ago, I discovered that Jason had accessed funds from one of my business accounts without permission. He explained it, he apologized, and I chose not to pursue it legally. Michael shifted slightly beside me but said nothing. I kept reading. But from that moment on, I made changes. Quiet ones, permanent ones. My grip on the paper tightened. Everything I have built, everything I leave behind, has been structured with conditions. Not to punish, but to protect. My heart began to beat faster. Because I knew what was coming. I just didn't know how far he had gone. If Jason ever attempts to coerce, manipulate, or remove you from your home or financial control, certain provisions will activate immediately. I looked up at Michael. His expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes. Confirmation. "Keep reading," he said quietly. I nodded and continued. "In that event, his inheritance is to be revoked in full." The words landed like thunder. Revoked. In full. I stared at the page, my mind racing. Those assets will instead be transferred into a trust designated for housing security for vulnerable individuals, particularly older women at risk of displacement. A long silence filled the room. Not empty, not hollow, but powerful. Because suddenly everything Jason had done, every step, every push, every calculated move, hadn't brought him closer to control. It had triggered the very thing Edward had put in place to stop him. I exhaled slowly, my hands steady again. Edward hadn't just prepared for this. He had anticipated it, designed around it, protected me, without ever making it feel like I needed protection. I looked at the remaining documents. Legal structures, clauses, clear language. No ambiguity, no loopholes. Michael stepped forward slightly. "This is enforceable," he said. "Every part of it." I nodded. "I believe you," I said. Because I did. For the first time since Jason had started this, I wasn't just reacting. I wasn't just defending. I had something stronger, something undeniable, something he couldn't twist or reinterpret. Truth and consequences. I folded the letter carefully, held it for a moment longer than necessary, then placed it back on the table. "Edward knew," I said quietly. Michael nodded. He prepared, he corrected gently. I let out a soft breath, and for the first time, I felt something close to certainty. Not about what Jason would do next, not about how far this would go, but about one thing. He had already lost. He just didn't know it yet. I didn't tell Jason about the letter. Not that day. Not the next. Not even when he started calling. Because once you understand someone's strategy, you stop reacting to their noise. And Jason was making a lot of noise. The first message came less than an hour after Michael and I returned from the bank. "We need to talk. This has gone too far." I looked at the screen for a moment, then set the phone down without replying. A few minutes later, another one. "You're being influenced. That lawyer is turning you against your own family." Family. It almost would have been laughable if it hadn't been so deliberate, because now I understood Jason wasn't just trying to control the situation anymore. He was trying to regain the narrative, and that mattered more to him than anything else. By the third message, his tone had shifted. "You don't understand what you're doing." I did, better than he could imagine, but I still didn't respond. Instead, I followed Michael's advice. I documented everything, every text, every voicemail, every attempt, because this wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about pattern, proof, intent, and Jason was providing all of it, without realizing it. The voicemail came that evening, his voice tight, controlled, but strained beneath the surface. "Viola, you need to stop this. You're making a mistake. I'm trying to help you and you're pushing me away. Call me back." I saved it, labeled it, moved on. Then came Amber. But unlike Jason, she didn't leave a message. She called once, twice, then nothing. And that silence told me more than anything she could have said. She was thinking, recalculating, deciding where she stood now that things were no longer certain. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Linda. I had called her over as soon as I returned from the bank, not to vent, not to cry, but to show her, to share the truth Edward had left behind. She read the letter slowly, her expression shifting with every line. When she finished, she set it down carefully. Well, she said quietly, he didn't just plan ahead. No, I replied. He built something. Linda nodded. And Jason just walked right into it. There was no satisfaction in her voice. No cruelty. Just clarity. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. He thought I was the weak point, I said. Linda met my eyes. He thought wrong. We sat in silence for a moment. Then she leaned forward slightly. What's your next move? She asked. I considered that, because for the first time since this started, I had options. Real ones. Not reactions. Not defenses. Choices. Nothing, I said finally. Linda raised an eyebrow. Nothing, she repeated. For now, I clarified. We let him keep talking. Keep pushing. Keep showing exactly who he is. She nodded slowly. Build the case, she said. Yes, because that's what this had become. Not just a family conflict. Not just betrayal. But something measurable. Something provable. And Jason was helping me prove it. The next escalation came 2 days later. A letter. Hand-delivered. Official. Cold. I opened it at the dining table, my hands steady despite the tightening in my chest. Linda sat across from me watching. I unfolded the document, read the first line, and felt the shift immediately. Petition for guardianship, I said quietly. Linda's expression hardened. Of course, she murmured. I continued reading. Jason was formally requesting that the court declare me incapable of managing my own affairs, that he be granted authority over my finances, my residence, my decisions, everything. The language was careful, professional, but the intent was unmistakable. Control, total, absolute. He's moving faster than I expected, Linda said. He's desperate, I replied, because now I understood the timing, the urgency, the escalation. Something was pushing him, and whatever it was big enough to risk everything. Michael arrived within the hour after I called him. He read the document once, then again. His expression remained calm but focused. He's built a narrative, he said. Yes, I replied. And now he's trying to formalize it, he added. Linda crossed her arms. Will it hold? She asked. Michael looked at me. Not if we dismantle it properly, he said. How? I asked. He set the document down. Evidence, he said simply. And we have it, we're building it, he corrected. He looked at me carefully. I need you to think of everything he said, every interaction, every instance where he questioned your memory, every time he repositioned himself as the authority. I nodded. I have some of it, I said. Texts, voicemails. Good, he said. We'll use all of it. Linda leaned forward. And the lockout, she asked. Michael's eyes shifted slightly. That helps us, he said. A lot. How? I asked. Because it shows action, he replied. Not just suggestion. Not just concern. He didn't just question your capability, he acted on that claim. I understood. He tried to remove me, I said. Yes, Michael said. Without legal authority. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. That's not just manipulation, she said. That's something else. Michael nodded. It could qualify as elder abuse, he said. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Serious. Real. I sat back slightly, letting that settle. Because this had crossed a line. Not emotionally, not symbolically, legally. And that changed everything. There's more, I said. Michael looked at me. The letter, I added. Edward's conditions. He nodded slowly. Yes, he said, and we will use that carefully. Why carefully? Linda asked. Because once we introduce it, he said, there's no going back. It changes the entire structure of the case. I understood. That was the final move, the decisive one. And we're not there yet, I asked. Not yet, he said. First we let Jason establish his position fully, then we dismantle it piece by piece. Piece by piece. Just like he had tried to dismantle me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Michael gathered the documents. I'll handle the legal response, he said. In the meantime, do not engage with him directly. Let everything go through me. I will, I said. He paused at the door, then turned back slightly. Viola, he said, this is going to escalate before it resolves. I nodded. I know, but I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Because the fear had been replaced by something else. Understanding. Preparation. and a quiet, unshakable truth. Jason believed he was taking control, but in reality, he was walking himself straight into consequences he didn't even see coming, and I was done trying to stop him. Now, I was going to let him. The hearing was set for 3 weeks later. 3 weeks. It sounds like a short amount of time when you say it out loud, but when you're living inside it, when every day carries the weight of what's coming, it stretches. It lingers. It sharpens everything. I followed Michael's instructions carefully. I didn't respond to Jason. I didn't defend myself publicly. I didn't try to explain my side to neighbors or friends who had started asking careful, curious questions. Because Michael had been very clear about one thing: let the truth build quietly, he told me. We don't need noise. We need clarity. So that's what I focused on. Clarity. Every message Jason sent saved. Every voicemail archived. Every date, every time, every detail recorded. Linda helped me organize everything into a timeline. Not emotional, not reactive, just facts, patterns, behavior. And the more we laid it out, the clearer it became. Jason hadn't acted impulsively. He had escalated, gradually, deliberately, and the court would see that. But even with all of that preparation, the morning of the hearing still felt different, heavier, more real. I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, adjusting my blouse, smoothing my hair, steadying my breath, not because I was unsure of myself, but because I understood what was at stake. This wasn't just about winning. It was about being seen, being believed, being recognized for who I actually was, not the version Jason had been trying to construct. Michael met me outside the courthouse. "You ready?" he asked. "Yes," I said, and for the first time I meant it without hesitation. Inside, the courtroom was quieter than I expected. Smaller, too. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just structured, controlled. Jason was already there, sitting at the table across from where we would be, dressed in a tailored suit, composed, calm. If someone didn't know the situation, they would have seen exactly what he wanted them to see. A responsible son, concerned, measured, trying to do the right thing. Amber sat beside him, her posture more rigid than before, her expression uncertain. That caught my attention, because Amber had always been careful, always controlled, and now something was shifting. Jason glanced at me as I entered, just briefly, but long enough for me to see it. He still believed he could win. That hadn't changed. Good. Let him believe that. Michael guided me to our seats. "Remember," he said quietly, "we don't rush. We don't react. We present." I nodded. "I understand." The hearing began. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat. And just like that, it was no longer personal. It was formal, structured. And everything that followed would be measured against evidence, not emotion. Jason's attorney spoke first. A composed man with a calm, persuasive tone. He laid out the narrative clearly, carefully. "Your Honor, my client is here out of concern for his stepmother's well-being," he began. "Over the past several months, he has observed a decline in her ability to manage daily responsibilities, including financial obligations and property maintenance." I listened, not reacting, not interrupting, because I recognized it. Every piece of it. This was the story Jason had been building. Now it was being presented as fact. "She has exhibited signs of memory inconsistency," the attorney continued. "Misplaced documents, confusion regarding routine tasks, and resistance to assistance." Misplaced documents, confusion, resistance. The same words, the same framing, repackaged, formalized, strategic. I kept my expression steady because I knew what was coming next. The part where they tried to make it sound reasonable. "We are not seeking to remove her independence entirely," the attorney said, "only to ensure that she has proper support and oversight during this vulnerable time." Support, oversight, the same language, always softened, always justified. The judge nodded slightly, then turned toward Michael. "Mr. Grant," he said. Michael stood, calm, measured, unshaken. "Your Honor," he began, "what has just been presented is not concern." He paused, then continued. "It is construction. The word landed clearly, intentionally. Michael didn't rush, didn't raise his voice. He simply began laying things out, one piece at a time. Over the course of several weeks, Mr. Price has engaged in a pattern of behavior designed to create the appearance of incapacity, he said. He presented the texts, the voicemails, each one documented, time-stamped, consistent. Then the escalation. The situation moved beyond suggestion and into action, Michael continued. He introduced the lockout, the unlawful removal, the physical act of denying me access to my own home. The judge's expression shifted slightly, just enough. Then came the evidence that changed the tone of the room, the video from the neighbor's security camera. Michael handed it over, and for the first time, Jason's confidence wavered. The footage played, clear, unmistakable. Jason at the door, changing the locks, Amber nearby, holding one of the trash bags, laughing. Not concerned, not worried, laughing. The room went still, completely still, because that moment destroyed the narrative. Not gradually, not subtly, but completely. Jason shifted in his seat. Amber looked down, and for the first time, they had no control over how they were seen. Michael let the silence sit, then spoke again. "This is not support," he said. "This is removal." The judge leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Price," he said, addressing Jason directly, "do you dispute this footage?" Jason hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. "No," he said finally. "But that doesn't show the full context. It shows enough," the judge replied. And just like that, the foundation cracked. But Michael wasn't finished. Not yet. He glanced at me briefly, then back at the judge. "There is one final element," he said, and I knew. This was it. The moment everything Edward had prepared would come into play. The moment Jason would understand what he had actually done. Michael reached into his folder and pulled out the document. The one Jason never knew existed. The one that would change everything. The room felt different before Michael even spoke again. You could sense it not just in the silence but in the way people held themselves. The judge leaning forward slightly. Jason sitting a little too still. Amber no longer looking up at all. Something had shifted. And everyone knew it. Michael didn't rush. He never did. He placed the document carefully on the table in front of him, then looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm but precise, "what we have shown so far establishes a clear pattern of manipulation, escalation, and unlawful action." He paused. "But what I am about to present," he continued, "explains why those actions carry consequences beyond this hearing." Jason's head lifted slightly. That got his attention. "Good." Michael picked up the document. "This," he said, "is a legally binding clause within Edward Price's estate plan." Jason frowned. "What clause?" he asked, unable to stop himself. Michael didn't look at him. Instead, he addressed the court. Several years prior to his passing, Mr. Price amended his estate with specific conditional provisions, he said. These provisions were designed to protect his spouse, Viola Price, from any attempt of coercion, manipulation, or unlawful removal from her residence or financial control. The words were clear, unmistakable, and for the first time, Jason's certainty broke. "You're saying he started." Michael continued uninterrupted. "If such behavior were to occur," he said, "the designated beneficiary, Jason Price, would forfeit his inheritance in full." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, final. Jason blinked. Once, twice, as if trying to process what he had just heard. "That's not," he said, his voice faltering. "That's not possible." Michael turned, then finally meeting his eyes. "It is," he said simply. Jason shook his head. "No," he said louder now. "No, that's not what my father wanted. He would never." "He did," Michael replied, and there was no room for argument in his tone. Amber's head snapped up, her eyes wide now. "Jason," she whispered, but he didn't hear her. Or maybe he refused to. "This is a trick," he said, his voice rising. "You're twisting things. You're turning her against me." Michael didn't react. He simply handed the document to the judge. "Everything is clearly outlined," he said. "Signed, witnessed, legally enforceable." The judge took the document. "Read it." Once. Then again. The room held its breath. Because this wasn't just about the house anymore. This wasn't just about guardianship. This was about everything Jason thought he was securing, everything he believed he was entitled to, everything he had been moving toward with such careful, calculated steps. And in that moment, it was slipping through his fingers. "Mr. Price," the judge said, finally looking up, "were you aware of this provision?" Jason stared at him. Speechless. "Then no," he said. The word came out thin, unsteady, the first honest thing he had said all day. The judge nodded slowly. "That is unfortunate," he said. "Unfortunate." Such a small word for something so large. Because what Jason had done wasn't just a mistake. It was a trigger. And now the consequences were already in motion. Amber reached for his arm again, more urgently this time. "Jason, we need to," she began, but he pulled away sharply. "No," he snapped. "No, this isn't over." His eyes turned to me then. For the first time, there was no calm, no calculation, just raw, unraveling anger. "You did this," he said. I held his gaze. "No," I replied quietly. "You did." The truth of it landed between us. And he knew it, because deep down, he understood exactly what he had done. Every step, every push, every decision had led him here. Not me, not Michael. Him. The judge spoke again, his voice firm now. Given the evidence presented, he said, "This court finds no basis for the guardianship petition. It is denied." Denied. Just one word. But it carried weight, finality, relief, justice. Jason's shoulders dropped slightly. Not in defeat, not fully, but in the beginning of it. And further, the judge continued the actions taken by Mr. Price, including the unlawful lock change and removal of personal property, raised serious concerns. This matter will be referred for review under potential elder abuse statutes. That word again. Elder abuse. This time not whispered, not suggested. Official, documented, real. Amber let out a small, sharp breath. Jason didn't move, didn't speak, didn't react, because there was nothing left to say. The structure he had built had collapsed. Completely. The hearing concluded shortly after. People began to stand, to gather their things, to leave. But for me, time slowed again. Not in shock, not in confusion, but in recognition. Because this was the moment everything shifted. Not when he locked me out, not when I made the call, but here, when the truth stood in the open and couldn't be rewritten. Jason remained where he was for a moment longer, then finally stood. Amber moved closer to him, her voice low and urgent. "We need to go," she said. He didn't respond. He just stared ahead, as if trying to reconstruct something that no longer existed, as if trying to find a version of this where he hadn't just lost everything. But there wasn't one. Not anymore. I stood slowly, my hands steady at my sides. Michael placed a gentle hand near my arm. "You did well," he said quietly. I nodded. But I knew the truth. This wasn't about doing well. This was about standing firm. And finally, being seen clearly. Jason turned then, looked at me one last time. But this time, there was no authority in his eyes. No certainty. No control. Only something else. Something unfamiliar. Loss. And maybe, just maybe, understanding. But it came too late. Far too late. The house was quiet again. Not the fragile quiet that comes after tension waiting for the next thing to break, but a different kind. A deeper one. The kind that settles slowly like dust after a storm. It had been 3 days since the hearing. 3 days since everything Jason had built collapsed in front of him. 3 days since I walked out of that courtroom not just vindicated, but free. And yet as I stood in the middle of my living room that morning, I realized something I hadn't expected. Freedom doesn't feel loud. It doesn't arrive with celebration or relief the way people imagine. It comes quietly, almost cautiously, like it's asking permission to stay. I ran my hand along the back of Edward's chair, my fingers tracing the worn edge where his hand used to rest. "I think you knew," I murmured softly, not as a question, but as acknowledgement, because everything he had done, everything he had prepared, had led to this moment. He hadn't stopped Jason. He hadn't exposed him. He had simply made sure the truth would reveal itself when it mattered most, and it had, perfectly. I let out a slow breath and moved toward the front door. The new lock caught my eye immediately. Clean, secure, uncompromised. I had chosen it myself this time, not out of fear, but out of ownership, because that mattered now. Every detail mattered, every decision, every boundary. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. The same porch, the same swing, the same space where just days ago I had sat with my life in 2 trash bags at my feet. I walked over to the swing and sat down slowly. The wood creaked beneath me, familiar now in a different way, not as a place of shock, but as a place of memory, of transition, of change. I leaned back slightly, letting the morning air settle around me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel watched. I didn't feel evaluated. I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. And that was something I hadn't realized I had lost. Later that afternoon, Linda came by. She didn't knock, she never did, but this time when she stepped inside, her eyes softened immediately. "You look different," she said. I smiled faintly. "I feel different," I replied. She nodded. "Good," she said. "You should." We sat in the kitchen, the same place where everything had started to come together, the same table where I had first told her something was wrong, and now it felt like a different room entirely. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. It was a simple question, but not a small one, because for the first time since Edward passed, I wasn't reacting to something. I was choosing. "I'm staying," I said. Linda raised an eyebrow. "You're not even considering selling?" she asked. I shook my head. I thought about it, I admitted. After everything, it felt like the house had been altered somehow. She nodded slowly. "That makes sense." But then I realized something. I continued. "What?" she asked. "This house didn't change," I said. "What changed was what it revealed." Linda leaned back slightly, considering that. "And you're okay with that?" she asked. I smiled. "I think I need it," I said, because the truth was, this house wasn't just where I had lived with Edward. It was where I had been tested, where I had been pushed, where I had nearly been erased, and where I had chosen to stand. That mattered. "I'm not leaving that behind," I added. Linda's smile returned. "Good," she said. We talked for a while longer about small things, ordinary things, and for the first time in weeks, the conversation didn't circle back to Jason, to the situation, to the tension, because it was over. Not completely, not emotionally, but structurally. The threat was gone, the control was gone, and what remained was mine. That evening, after Linda left, I walked through the house again, room by room, not searching, not checking, just seeing. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway, Edward's study. I paused there for a moment, stepping inside slowly. The desk sat exactly as it always had. The folders, the chair, the quiet order he had maintained so carefully. I moved closer, placing my hand gently on the surface. "You didn't leave me unprotected," I said softly. And I meant it, because protection doesn't always look like intervention. Sometimes it looks like preparation. And Edward had given me something more valuable than control. He had given me autonomy, the ability to stand, to choose, to act, even when everything around me was trying to take that away. I turned off the light and stepped out of the study, closed the door behind me. And for the first time since he passed, it didn't feel like closing something off. It felt like carrying something forward. Later, I returned to the porch, sat on the swing again, but this time, there were no bags beside me, no closed door, no one watching from the other side. Just quiet, just space, just me. And as I sat there, I realized something else, something simple, but important. The woman who had sat here days ago was not the same woman sitting here now. That woman had been shocked, hurt, disoriented. This one was steady, clear, and fully present, not because what happened didn't matter, but because I had moved through it and come out the other side, stronger, not louder, not harder, just stronger. And that was enough. It was almost 3 months later when Jason called again. Not text, not voicemail, An actual call. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to be sure that I was choosing to answer, not reacting, not pulled, choosing. Then I picked up. "Hello," I said. There was a pause on the other end, a breath, and then Viola. His voice was different, quieter, not controlled in the same way it used to be, not confident. Something else. Worn. "I didn't think you'd answer," he said. "I almost didn't," I replied calmly. Another pause. Longer this time. I need to talk to you," he said. I leaned back slightly in my chair, looking out at the yard through the window. "We can talk," I said. "But not here." "Okay," he said quickly. "Where a public place," I replied. He didn't argue. "All right," he said. "Just tell me when." We met 2 days later at a small cafe across town. Neutral ground. Open space. No history attached to it. I arrived first, chose a table near the window, ordered tea, and waited, not anxiously, not nervously, just present. Jason walked in 10 minutes later, and for a moment I almost didn't recognize him. Not physically. He looked the same. But the way he carried himself had changed. The sharpness was gone, the certainty, the quiet arrogance, all of it replaced by something heavier, consequences. He spotted me and walked over slowly. "Hi," he said, stopping at the table. "Hi," I replied. He hesitated, then sat down across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke, because there was nothing left to pretend, nothing left to shape, only truth. "I messed up," he said finally. "Direct, simple, late." I nodded slightly. "Yes," I said. He let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. "You don't understand how bad things got," he said. I didn't respond. Because I wasn't there to understand, I was there to listen. "My business," he continued, shaking his head slightly, "it failed. Worse than I expected. We were behind on everything. Loans, payments, everything. Amber, the house, the pressure, it all connected. We thought." He paused, then corrected himself. "I thought if I could stabilize things quickly, I could fix it before it got worse. And my house was the solution," I asked. He looked down. "I didn't think of it like that at the time," he said, "but that's what it was," I replied. He nodded slowly. "Yes." There was no defensiveness now, no framing, just acknowledgement. "I convinced myself it was temporary," he continued, "that I was helping, that you needed it." I leaned forward slightly. "No," I said quietly. "You needed it." The truth of that landed. He didn't argue, didn't try to redirect it. He just accepted it. "I know that now," he said. We sat in silence for a moment. Not uncomfortable, just clear. Then he looked up at me. I lost everything he said. Not as an accusation, not as blame, just a statement. "I know," I replied. Because I did. The inheritance, the case, the exposure. Amber had left shortly after the hearing. Not dramatically, not publicly, just gone. And Jason was left with what remained, which wasn't much. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. I needed to say it. To you." I studied him for a moment, really looked. And for the first time, I didn't see a threat. I didn't see manipulation. I didn't see strategy. I saw someone who had run out of ways to control the outcome and was finally facing it. "I believe you," I said. His shoulders dropped slightly. Relief, but only a little. Because belief wasn't forgiveness, and it definitely wasn't access. "I'm sorry," he said. I held his gaze. "I forgive you," I replied. The words surprised him. I could see it immediately, but I continued before he could misunderstand. "That doesn't change anything," I added. The relief faded slightly, replaced by something else. "Understanding, I know," he said quietly. "Do you?" I asked. He nodded. "I think so." I leaned back slightly, folding my hands together. "When you changed those locks," I said, my voice calm but firm, "you didn't just try to take my house." He looked at me. "You decided I didn't belong in my own life anymore." The words hung between us, heavy, unavoidable. "And that," I continued, "is not something that just resets." He swallowed. I understand, he said. And this time, I believed him. Not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. No excuses, no justification, no attempt to soften it, just acceptance. I don't hate you, I said. His eyes flickered slightly. But I'm not opening that door again, I added. He nodded. I didn't expect you to, he said. And that was the moment I knew this conversation had reached its purpose. Not reconciliation, not repair, but clarity. Final, complete. We sat for a few more minutes, not saying much, not needing to. Then he stood. Thank you for meeting me, he said. I nodded. Take care of yourself, Jason, I replied. He gave a small, tired nod, then turned and walked away. And this time, I didn't watch him go. I didn't need to, because whatever connection had once existed had already been released. When I returned home later that afternoon, the sun was low in the sky, warm, steady. I walked up the path, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. No hesitation, no doubt, just certainty. This was my home, not because of a document, not because of a legal ruling, but because I had stood in it, fought for it, and refused to be removed from it. I walked through the house slowly, letting the quiet settle around me. Then, almost without thinking, I stepped back outside, onto the porch, and sat down on the swing. The same place where everything had changed, the same place where I had once felt discarded. But now, it felt different. Not symbolic, not dramatic, just mine. I leaned back, letting the soft creak of the wood settle into the air, and for the first time in a long time, there was nothing left to resolve, nothing left to defend, nothing left to prove. Only one thing remained: peace. There's a quiet kind of betrayal that doesn't arrive with shouting or obvious cruelty. It comes dressed as concern. It sounds like help. It looks like protection. And if you're not careful, especially in moments of grief or vulnerability, it can slowly rewrite your place in your own life. What I learned is this: kindness without respect is not kindness, it's control. And control often hides behind patience, strategy, and carefully chosen words. But I also learned something just as important. Strength doesn't always look loud. It doesn't always fight back immediately. Sometimes strength is sitting still on a porch when everything inside you wants to break, and choosing the right moment to act. Sometimes it's trusting that preparation, truth, and clarity will outlast manipulation. And sometimes it's knowing that forgiveness doesn't mean reopening the door someone tried to close on you. You are allowed to forgive and still protect your boundaries. You are allowed to move forward without taking everyone with you. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt underestimated, pushed aside, or quietly controlled, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? What time is it there? And most importantly, what would you have done if you were sitting on that porch? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if stories like this speak to you, because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is tell the truth.